This is Season 1, Episode 2 of the AV Antics Podcast. I'm John Bournes, and joining me is my co-host, Cory Allen. If this is your first time joining the podcast, I recommend you go back and watch Season 1, Episode 1, where we sort of figured out how we were doing this podcast. Initially, I was the guest, but because we had so much fun, Cory decided he couldn't do it without me. And now we are co-hosting this, and we're going to be doing a conversational podcast where we'll have our musings on general topics and thoughts on the AV industry. Cory and I are both longtime friends and coworkers for well over 10 years now, longtime hockey teammates, and we are currently members of the services sales team here at Exertis Almo. And we are the only podcast on the Exertis Almo podcast network that is featuring friends and hockey players and service team members here in the company.
Which is pretty crazy.
Also, Cory, I noticed I am wearing the official merch of the Exertis Almo podcast network. Is that a cool thing, or is that like wearing the band T-shirt to the concert you're going to? Is that a bad thing?
I think it's appropriate. I'm also wearing our merch, but I haven't put the logos on my hat yet. So, but eventually I'll have EAV right here in the center of my cowboy hat. But no, I don't think it's the same thing as wearing a band T-shirt if you're in the band. Although that was weird, and that was something that when I was in a band, one of the members of my band did. And I was like, you shouldn't do that, right? And they were like, I don't care, because the shirts and all.
Well, is it cool to wear? Is it cool to wear the band shirt of the band you're going to go see? Like if you're going to a Slayer concert, is it cool to wear a Slayer shirt?
Do that. Yeah, I mean, I did that with Motley Crue.
Your dog is in the background walking in front of your lights, and it's creating some real trippy lighting effects behind you, by the way. I like it. A
little pug man. Yeah. No, and I will say, I am really glad that we are bro hosts now. I think that's pretty cool. I'm very excited about that. Also, by the way, I wanted this to be a nice little surprise for you. I heard about this tip and trick that when you're podcasting, that if you drink a glass of milk, it'll actually help you articulate your words better. So I do have my glass of milk with me. So I'm very excited about that. I would recommend that if we don't get canceled after episode 2, that in episode 3, you and I both cheers with a glass of milk every single time we podcast, because I heard what it does is it will actually help reduce the amount of mucus in your mouth and your saliva, so it can help you better articulate your words on the podcast. So I'm really excited to also, one, have a great conversation with you and a guest today. Also, I'm enjoying this delicious glass of whole milk.
So one is funny that we talked about it's not being canceled yet, because the first episode has yet to officially even air. So we are recording this in advance. So this very well may be us getting canceled for the second episode. We don't know yet. I also made a couple notes here, Cory, as I was listening to our first podcast this morning. I was going to say this is a podcast that talks about the audio video industry, but we also talk a lot about the following things: the Cleveland Browns, movies from the early 2000s, roller hockey, and a lot of time was spent talking about milks and juices. And you've already brought it back to milk. So this is like going to be a podcast that is like, that's going to be talking more about milk than about the AV industry potentially.
It's very possible.
And I hope that stays the same.
Listen, we go where the audience takes us. I also do want to say, just in this intro, please, if you haven't already, if this episode 2 gets released, that if you want to watch it, that you can subscribe, obviously, on YouTube, and you can watch it so you can see the hilarity if you want to, but also available on all podcast platforms as well. So the likes of Apple Podcasts, which is like, is it Apple Podcast now? Or is it just, I think that's what it's called. It used to be something different.
I just call it the podcast app. This little purple button on my phone.
And then Spotify, which is, the second line. And then there's a bunch to follow that. So wherever you decide you want to listen to podcasts, will be available on there as well.
So, Cory, the first podcast, you had done a little bit of a get to know me, because you were the host and I was but a guest. But now that we're peers and equals, I feel like we have done you a disservice, and then the fans must know more about you. So I have one silly question I'd like to ask you, and I'm curious to know your thoughts on it. It's a would you rather question, which
don't do a would you rather.
Which are types of questions that our soon-to-be guest is a big fan of. It's a simple one, Cory. Would you rather be forever itchy or forever sticky? Forever sticky.
Oh, forever itchy.
Forever itchy?
Yeah, it's a real easy one for me because I'm like an obsessive hand washer. It's a real challenge when you have a daughter to, one, not be sticky because of their stickiness. And I have this already. It's not a germaphobe thing. I don't like stickiness to any degree. I mean, even the other day we were eating somewhere and I remember my feet sticking to the ground. And every time I picked them up, just like, I cannot stand that. So that's a very easy one for me. Forever itchy, whatever. I'll get used to that. The stickiness I can't handle.
Has your daughter gotten into iPad yet? Does she have her own iPad or her own screen of some type? I guess I should keep it brand agnostic. Does she have her own tablet?
She has her own tablet, but she prefers my cell phone. That she has locked me out of many times and has accidentally called 911 twice, and has also changed the language on my phone to Portuguese. And I had a real struggle trying to get it back to English.
So these are all reasons why I refuse to let my kids ever use my phone, but also because their iPads are constantly covered in like applesauce and boogers and like
it's not
crumbs. And so like the sticky finger reaction is a big problem around my house too. My kids are like older. My kid's 9 and he's got the most disgusting iPad I've ever seen. He'd be like, Dad, can you unlock, because I have to put in a parental passcode from like download certain apps and stuff, and like just touching it I have to feel like I need to wash my hands for an hour.
Those like latex gloves on every time you touch his iPad.
Yeah, it's real gross.
Yeah,
we had to scrape it. Last time we cleaned it, we had to get like a scraper. We had to scrape like all the crud off it.
Ew. Yeah, see, like even like keyboards and stuff, I keep very clean. I'm very diligent with that. I clean the keys on my keyboard. I actually pop the keys off and clean them, and I'll put them in a solution to clean them. I wash my hands. I have hand sanitizer probably 15 to 20 times a day, like legitimately.
Like Howie Mandel kind of stuff, right?
Not to that. He won't shake people's hands though. I'm not that bad. Like that guy won't even touch other human beings. I'm not that bad. It's just and it really isn't like a germaphobe thing. It is the stickiness. It's that I don't like. It's grime. It's stick. I just can't do it. So that question's a pretty easy one for me, just because I have such an adversity to being sticky. What about you? Can I flip it on its head?
I think I'm gonna go itchy also, but like I don't like itchiness. When it got really cold, back in end of January, when it was in the single digits, I was so dry. I was like constantly like itchy and scratchy, and it was miserable. I think I'd prefer that over being sticky. Sticky's gross.
Well, it is kind of weird too, thinking about the fact that like when I talk about washing my hands, because I don't like stickiness, the more I wash my hands, the more itchy they get because they dry out. So it's like it is really a one or the other kind of thing. Now, the other thing too is that like I'm also not a good moisturizer. Like I'm not, so I will obsessively scrub my hands, but also will just complain about them being dried and cracked, and I won't do anything about it whatsoever. So that's a fault of my own. That's something I should talk to my therapist about. Anyway, hey, we have a guest on today, which is very exciting.
We do.
Doesn't have to be a surprise because I'm sure it'll be labeled in the description of the episode, but we will be having on Morgan Glandorf, who is Director of Services, which would be nice to talk to about her. We have some topics we're going to discuss. We're going to get to know her a little bit. We do have some questions to ask her. And then we're going to get on the subject of something that has been part of our services offering for a very long time. Most people know, if you've done business with us before on the services side, that we do labor and installation support. We've done that in two facets for an extended period of time. And we're full installation, which is, hey, we send our crew out, right? And they do everything for you, provided we have all the information, or we do augmented labor. But we've since changed what we do and how we position what we do, we feel, for the betterment of our customers. So we're going to talk about that as well. And I'm excited to actually get into that topic because internally we've talked about it a lot, but we haven't necessarily expressed it too much externally. So that'll be a fun one to discuss.
That was a very good podcast tease there, Cory. Way to tease the guest.
I teased it a lot. It felt good too. You're welcome. Is that you're welcome? Oh, no, that's howdy.
What's the inspiration for the hat today, by the way?
I decided that on each episode I'm going to wear a new hat. So I
decided that I'm probably going to have different facial hair every time I get on the podcast. So
can you do that?
That'll be something you can look forward to. I mean, I have so far. I had a beard last time, and now I'm going more mustache heavy.
Oh, I like it. I like it. I dig it. I think also
It's just some of the crazy antics you get with the AV Antics podcast. You get hats, cool you get optional mustaches. It's crazy, man. They may shut us down for this kind of stuff.
I think it'd be cool if you just shaved your head. You have a weird skull, don't you? You look like someone has a weird skull.
I don't know. I've never shaved my head. I'm the only Borns of like my generation and the previous generation who is not bald at the age of like 27. Really? So I feel like I owe it to the family to carry the torch.
Your brother's bald?
Bald enough.
Bald enough. That's a great term.
I mean, there's sliding scales of bald, right? Like he's not cue ball bald, but he's receding.
Yeah, there's like thinning, receding. And then you like, it's weird how people like, so at the age of 75, I know this is like, it's nothing to do with this podcast, but my dad's 75 years old, soon to be 76. My dad has a very full head of hair. I think it's where I get my hair from, right? Like my dad, that age, never bald, except like, I think this has happened in the recent like 6 months. Like the last time I saw him, I was standing behind him. My dad's very short. So like I can see down into his skull, not literally into his skull,
into his skull,
down on the outside of his, and he's got a bald spot that's just starting to form, like right in the middle. Yeah. Like, but it doesn't look like a natural thinning of hair. It just looks like someone just pulled a chunk of his hair out in the middle of his head. It's very strange.
Maybe someone did.
It's very possible. Deservingly so. You probably deserved it. We have a fun guest with us. Morgan Glandorf joining us. She's director of services. So we're all on the same team together, which is very fun. We're pals. I would say that we're pals. Morgan, you and I have known each other for almost probably 9 years, getting close to 9 years.
Yeah, about 9 years.
So we've been friends for a while, but then we've also worked together for the past like 4 years and a week. We've worked on the same team,
almost to the date,
which is kind of crazy.
Was Morgan employee number one on the services team, or are you technically number one?
No, I was not number one. Morgan and Jay were technically number one.
This is actually a well-kept secret for services here that Darren Altman was actually employee number one. That is true.
Darren Altman was.
I think he has PTSD from those days. He used to manage all of like the labor projects and everything, and that's when they diversified and split the services among the BDMs. But when they added a project team, that's when I joined.
He really goes out of his way to conceal that, doesn't he?
He does, and I make sure nobody forgets it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I okay. Now I remember that. And so there has been multiple iterations, like a phoenix rising from the ashes 3 times. And here we are. But I'm going to say, here's the one nice thing I'm going to say. Obviously, we've been friends for a while. We've worked together for a while. I could not do what I've done without you, because you have been so incredibly instrumental, obviously, in everything services. It's being built up to what it is today. And I've often said, like, if it wasn't for you, this whole thing would just completely erode away. And there probably wouldn't be a services division. So that's the one nice thing I'm going to say about you. And the rest of it, I'm going to talk an immense amount of someone bleep that.
That's fine. I appreciate that. I'm sure it was really tough for you to say that. So good for you.
I had to script it because it was almost like my brain wouldn't allow me to say that.
Well, you had AI write that for you, right? Did you go into ChatGPT and just type in like how to say something nice about someone you've worked with for a long time?
Correct.
And that's what you got?
Correct. 100%. And then I said, and then it wrote me like 3 paragraphs, and I just kept saying shorter. And they wrote me like 2 paragraphs, and I said even shorter. And then wrote me like 1 paragraph and like 2 sentences. And so finally it was able to collapse it down.
It was well said, to the point. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then for you to be able to read it, they had to put in the doodle suit so you could read the letters.
No, they had to read it to him so many times that he just memorized it like somebody reading lines. We all know Cory can't read.
I cannot read. That's kind of why I want one of those Apple Vision Pros, is because I feel like the shortcut and the cheat codes to being efficient with work, especially when you're not highly intelligent like myself, it's just like a great shortcut to make you smarter than what you actually are and more efficient than you actually are. And I'm really looking forward to buying one of those. Hopefully the company will end up buying them for everybody. Then we can all have Apple Vision Pros and be highly successful in what we do.
Are those weird, like crazy goggles, like what they put on horses so they don't get spooked?
They look very similar. Yeah.
This is also, Cory, 2 consecutive podcasts where we talked about the Apple Vision Pro.
Is true.
So unless they're sponsoring this podcast, we're probably going to get into trouble.
Sounds like.
I will say, we just wrapped up, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this at all, but we wrapped up the Almo DCE4, which was a shockingly good show. Not that they're not all good shows, but that one actually legitimately surprised me, and I would probably put it in the top 3 E4s that I've been to in terms of interaction, engagement, attendance. I mean, attendance was wild. I mean, even like the opening, the keynote, I looked around at some because I was like kind of shoved in the middle, sort of the room, so I couldn't see the people behind me. And I looked behind me and it was literally standing room only, which I thought was crazy. I've never seen one of those spaces that packed, which was pretty crazy.
Yeah, I haven't either. They did a great job this year.
Yeah, a lot of good stuff. So Morgan, part of this is that we want to get to know a little bit more about you. And one of the things that and we've had this conversation before, but we always find it fascinating to an extent that like people getting into AV always seems accidental. So how in the hell did you end up at Exertis Almo?
That is a great question. So very accidental, like you said. I was a military history major at Ohio State with a focus on pre-law. And I knew that I wanted to take a little bit of time between undergrad and law school. So I was looking at jobs. My now husband had moved to Baltimore, Maryland for work. He was a year older than me. And I loved the city. I went to visit a few times. So I was looking out there and in DC and interviewing, and I ended up applying for a returns coordinator position here and got a call from Lindsay Sittner, who's our IS director, and asked to set up an interview. I said yes, booked a ticket from Columbus to Maryland, interviewed, and they offered a job. I ended up accepting, and under the premise that I'd have to wait till May when I graduated, and moved out to Maryland the day after I graduated OSU.
So how many jobs, how many positions of the company have you occupied since you've been here?
So I started as a returns coordinator, and then we acquired IAVI about a year after that. And that required creating a returns manager position. So I was lucky enough to get that role, held it for probably a year, and then I became a services project manager. And I always joke, and Cory, we've talked about this, every other position I've had has kind of been created as we've grown as a team in a company. So right. After project manager, I went on maternity leave, and you realized the extra crap I was doing outside of that. And you were gracious enough to create a role for management when I returned to kind of encompass those other responsibilities I'd taken on. And then late last year, I was promoted to director of services. So I guess that would be 5 different roles in about 9 years.
So that segues nicely into a question that I think we're going to ask most of the guests that we have on here, because I think it's a funny topic. So we all obviously work in AV, and we all have a good understanding of what the AV industry looks like and what we do. When you're at a backyard barbecue and some stranger or some acquaintance asks you, what do you do for a living? How do you describe what you do to somebody who you know has no idea what you do? What do you explain to people when that question comes up?
Well, judging going off the person that asked, I would say anything from, I work in distribution, and leave it at that, to I work in commercial audiovisual distribution. I'm more on the service side, so installs, things like that. I always use BW3s as a reference, so those displays that you see.
I think I do too.
Yeah, everybody does. Everybody from Ohio, I think, uses that. But all the displays that you see, someone has to install them, design the systems, things like that. I'm involved on that side of things. And usually it's met with a deadpan, oh, okay. And then they walk away and probably regret asking me.
See, but every once in a while you get someone that's kind of uniquely fascinated by it. Like my default used to always be, hey, you've been to a BW3s, right? And they're like, yeah. Okay, so all those displays, those all come from us. And they go, oh, and then, but some people will be like, tell me more. And you're just like, I really thought it would end there. And when it doesn't, I'm like, I don't know where to go now. So usually I just walk away.
Yep. Well, the worst is trying to explain to my parents what I do, because people ask them, they like to brag about their children. And I found out for years, my dad was out there telling people I work for Elmo. So I found out very recently, my dad actually has a note in his phone that's like a synopsis of what I do for a living. And this man will literally pull it out and tell people, read it from a script.
It is cute, but I just imagine your dad interfacing with someone at some formal event and they go, "So what do your kids do?" And you're like, "Hold on, let me pull up what Morgan does," as he like goes to the notes on his phone.
Because my siblings have the other, one word profession answers, a cop, a pharmacist, things like that. Right. Mine requires a little bit more explanation.
I've done the same thing as you because I've had to answer it so many times that I've dulled it down to distribution. Because I work for a large distributor, a global distributor, and that's what I do. And then typically it doesn't go any further than that, because even if you say I work for a global distribution company, people are like, and I'm out. Like they don't even want to ask, well, what do you sell?
You know why that works too? It's because it's equal parts like boring and like unknowable. Like people like don't know. People don't like want to know like how the sausage gets made enough, and they don't really care to figure it out. So that's a good way to just like quell all like intrigue and interest about your job going forward.
That has usually ended the conversation pretty quickly. But again, every once in a while, you get that one person that just is either wanting to just dialogue more, doesn't actually care, but pretends to care, right? The whole formality of conversation, and will ask you layers of questions. And I'm like, that I'm always unprepared for that. I'm like, how do I explain this and make it make sense?
I used to make the mistake of saying that I worked for a company that sells TVs, which is true, but I have never worked in a capacity here that sells TVs. Like prior to this was the Legrand BDM, which does not sell TVs. They sell everything but TVs. And so then people were asking me TV questions, and I was like, oh, I've drastically misled you. I do nothing about TVs at all.
Cables, you're the guy. Yeah. Well, I like to make it vague at distribution in general.
So now that that's established, you've talked about your journey to your role you're in. Give us, what do you do now that you're talking to people? Now we're back in the AV bubble of trust. Just explain what you do here at Exertis Almo that helps with our services team, apart from being my boss.
Yeah, that is a very tough question because it's a little bit of everything depending on the day. So I know what we do has a ton of gray area. You both know that. So my day-to-day is just trying to make that a little bit less ambiguous, more clear for everybody. So today, for example, I spent some time going through invoicing. I followed up with some vendors to set up trainings, things like that. I'm a hand in a lot of different pots, a lot of different teams. Prior to this year, I spent a lot of time working with the project management team that oversees installations, making sure that the details are coordinated and we get to a successful outcome. But they have gotten so self-sufficient. They're absolute rock stars that I don't spend as much time with that, which is great because then I can focus on some of the bigger things. I mentioned the manufacturer trainings, more future-oriented things rather than the day-to-day is the focus now.
Yeah, what's interesting is that I often think about like when we have to draft job descriptions, and I've rewritten 12 in the last probably 6 months, and you can't...
Rewritten or written?
Mostly written, some rewritten. Some of them drafted straight from the ground up. And what I always find interesting as I go through that practice is that you can't completely just articulate unless you want to make it 12 pages long, because there is so much ambiguity and there's so much gray area, and we're growing, and then we're trying to map our personnel with the long-term vision. So I think like even in your case, it's difficult to articulate what you do. Like you said, it depends on day to day. And one thing I always tell people is that the business that we've built is very entrepreneurial. It's like building your own business from the ground up. We've essentially been doing that at this, I would say at the third Phoenix rising from the ashes, our third reiteration, which is about 4 years ago. It was literally building a business from nothing, from the ground up. And that's unique in and of itself, because anybody who's within like a leadership role, and even folks that aren't within this business, like that just changes all the time. The expectation changes just based upon what you're working on. It's like, even there's times where it's like, I look at my job description and I say, okay, well, this is just all formality because I do 100 different things that are outside of this. So you really have to kind of encapsulate things in like this overarching effort, this umbrella effort, because its specificity doesn't matter. Because again, you'll write a 20-page job description if that were the case. So,
and then something would change, so you just tack on the age-old additional responsibilities
100%.
as needed.
That's the blanket that you put in every one of them.
Yeah. Exactly.
HR's best friend.
Yeah.
It is.
The jobs, a task as assigned.
Yes. Yeah. However you want to articulate that in the job description, all of mine have that in there. And then, of course, don't use that as like a reminder that do what I tell you to do. But it's just like, I don't. Oftentimes, it's just unique challenges and expectations, either from our customers or from how we want to do things going forward that span outside of that job description. So but you also have to have a team in place that understands and knows that too, that not everything is just always going to be black and white. And for the most part, our team is very accepting of that, which is great.
And they love it. They love that it's dynamic and fresh, more or less. Most of the time they do. I often feel like a catch-all, which keeps it fresh as well. But we definitely have a great team set up of people ready to jump on things and be flexible and change processes as needed. So we're very lucky there.
Cory, you mentioned, I guess, kind of like the vision and the evolution of the services team, which I think brings us to an interesting, I guess it brings us to the topic that we wanted to discuss, I think, primarily today, which is where we're at with our installation services. And, people may or not have done installation assistance with us in the past. And, we've handled it historically multiple different ways. We've done like what we used to call staff augmentation, which is we would send in like a helper tech or like an aide or whatever to assist on a job. And then we've also done what we call like a turnkey installation or a full installation, which is where we pretty much take entire install and handle it soup to nuts, front to back, doing everything on behalf of our customers. And we recently made the decision earlier this year to move away from the staff augment business and focus more heavily on the full install. And so I thought maybe, Morgan, you could give us a little bit of your thoughts on the evolution, how we got to that point, and how you think that benefits the organization going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I joined the team back in 2017, I believe it was, we had nationwide partners. It was more of a quantity over quality approach. Not saying that all the time, but it didn't have the personal touch that we put into it about 4 years ago. So we shifted to finding these smaller crews placed all over the country. We now have over 50 of them. Most of them are former field engineers for integrators that split off, did their own thing, and know a few people that can help out for bigger jobs. And that completely changed the game. So if this tech that we're sending, he or she owns his own business, they are more motivated to provide a solid outcome for our customer. It's not just a warm body that somebody found somewhere and send them to site. We had a ton of luck with the staff aug type model. Thanks to a couple amazing partners we have. This transition that we made this year has nothing to do with them. They were great. But during COVID, the quality of those texts that they were sending just absolutely tanked. Like I could tell some stories that they sound fake, but they're all very real. And it became not worth it, especially how successful we were on the turnkey front, which a lot of that is credited to our acquisition of Quadrillion back in January of 23, because now all of our engineering, programming, commissioning is in-house, so we can truly deliver a turnkey solution, everything from design to end user training. Whereas before, we were kind of piecemealing the different parts together. So I think that it's twofold there.
Cory, you muted yourself, by the way. It's very embarrassing on a podcast.
I don't know how you manage that.
I don't know how I do that.
Here you go.
So
you have to cut that now. Actually, I hope they don't.
Yeah, leave that in there.
Yeah, leave it in there. That's funny. One of the things that's interesting, too, that we've talked about is that, and this is kind of the ironic position of staff augmentation, is that typically when times are bad or integrators are having a rough time, either financially or contending with something like the pandemic or some sort of recession, one of the things that you get is an opportunity for better independent techs to be available, which makes staff augmentation or helper techs more inviting because you have a larger pool to pull from, and you typically have higher level techs working obviously independently, because unfortunately, when times in our industry get challenging and there are recessions or there's kind of a drawback in business, unfortunately, technicians are oftentimes the first folks to go. But that does create a nice pool to pull from when you do have opportunities where you need to kind of just plug someone in. And unfortunately, over the past few years, post-pandemic, everything in the AV industry, despite, the hybrid workspaces and the whole thing and return to work and all that still be kind of up in the air, the AV industry overall has been thriving. So what happens is you have that pool of great independent technicians that you can draw from, that you can provide assistance to other integrators. And in those times, it works out well. However, when integration companies get back to good, they want to hire those techs back. They want them back in their pool. So what happens is those great, amazing techs that are working independently will then find integration firms to work for. Because if you think about it, listen, if you're an independent tech, you're managing your own work through whatever platform you're involved in, or if you're just 100% working independently, you're covering your own health insurance, you're covering all your own expenses. You're having to manage more than just being on the job and working. And a lot of times it's more compelling for someone who may be working independently to look for that work where someone is managing those things for them and providing the benefits and providing the healthcare and the whole thing. So what happens is that pool ends up shrinking. And that, I think that's a challenge that we've run up against in the past year and a half, because at one time, helper tech, staff augmentation, however you want to define it, was a significant part of our business.
Oh, it was the biggest chunk of our business by quite a bit. And we had several people we could call. We knew by name. Like it was wonderful.
The expectation has just changed over time. And it's not just with us, right? Like that's the one thing I always kind of want to be clear about is like, if we're making these decisions, one, we're making them because we want the best outcomes for our customers as possible. But it's not just unique to us. It's just an industry-wide thing that has occurred. And I think with the success, like you said, that we've had in being able to provide full installation and in a lot of instances turnkey, literally delivering things from the inception of a project, has just been much more meaningful, not only to our customers and creating good outcomes, but just for us in general, like being able to process and maintain through those things. It just seems to be much more valuable.
Yeah. And us building out the crews that we did, I think, is the other side of what you mentioned, Cory, of integrators rehiring the techs that unfortunately got laid off during downtimes. Is some of those that went independent loved the freedom and created those little LLCs to keep working independently. And that is kind of where we found the most success.
I think one observation that I've had in having conversations with our customers since we've made this change is, we are trying to be better partners with our dealers in every way possible, and not just trying to plug in a problem-solving stop every once in a while. So by going down this path, we're not just trying to solve the problem you have today. We need a guy on site, or the problem you have next week with a guy on site. But we're trying to give solutions that are scalable and reproducible, and as you mentioned, quality-driven. And I think a lot of our customers have appreciated that. That's what we're trying to focus on, is to help their businesses grow, not just fix the problem that they're dealing with, but to give them, new creative ways to go into geographies that maybe they haven't spent as much time in, or take on a project that maybe they haven't been able to take on before because of bandwidth, or to maybe try out a project that's maybe a different kind of scope than they're accustomed to. So I think people are appreciating that we're not just trying to solve the small things, but trying to help them be strategic and grow as well. So more aligned with our overall values.
And how many integrators do you personally have that will now request certain techs by name?
Right.
So the personal touch is
there's another interesting point too, and I had this conversation with other partners that aren't in that space but recognize what that space is. And we talk about delivering quality or assuring good outcomes. There's less pieces to move. There's less things to be broken in that process as well, because typically when you look at a staff augmentation job, you're looking at it in two ways. You're looking at what personnel is going to be available from the integrator to be able to provide thorough instruction to these technicians that we're providing. And of course, we are having to provide those two technicians. And then or multiple technicians, however many is needed. You've got to go through a thorough vetting process here. Then you have to understand from the other side what needs to be done on the integration side of it. Who is actually going to be the person available on site? Are they able to and willing to provide instruction? Because I think sometimes what happens is that there isn't correct definition provided to what that person's supposed to be doing. And this is not a blame thing, but oftentimes it's we'll have someone on site. They're our field commissioner. Well, it's well, does your field commissioner have project management experience? are they able and willing to give instructions? And oftentimes, just because you have someone on site doesn't mean that there's a willingness to provide the instruction that's needed to the techs that are there to help. Because we've had it before where, I mean, it's great that you have a field commissioner on site, but that field commissioner is like, I don't know what, I'm not telling them what to do. I don't know what they're doing. Someone else should have been telling them what to do. And there's oftentimes you get a little bit of not setting that expectation and mismatch when it comes to site. And of course, it's not a pointing fingers or blaming thing. It's just not being able to calibrate appropriately as far as what is actually needed to do a job correctly. It's much more confidence in being able to send an entire crew out that understands, here's what the BOM is, here's what the scope of work is. It's my crew going and do this. We will make sure that the value of which you want to provide as an organization, both as an integrator and us as a distributor, to the end user collectively, we're all in alignment on. It's easier to do that than it was with the other recipe that we kind of had before.
What's funny also is as I've been going through this role for the last 6 months, one of the first questions that came up was like people asking for lead techs. And I learned over time that like what is a lead tech varies from company to company to company to company. So when someone says I need a lead tech or I have a lead tech, like the expectations of what that means like aren't really standardized across the industry. So a lead tech at company A can be very different than lead tech company B. So it's hard for us to anticipate that, and also have good outcomes because we don't always know what lead tech means.
Yeah, and we could go down that rabbit hole. Like industry definitions and best practices and principles are not a thing. It doesn't exist. Like Morgan and I are both a part of an operations group that is talking about solving these problems once a month. Or every single month. I've been a part of it for 2 years because it is challenging that everybody does have their own definition. It's no different than, oftentimes you have someone that says, I need a level 2 tech. It's like, what's your definition of level 2? I guarantee it's different than mine. I guarantee it's different than this other integrator versus this other integrator versus another partner that we may have to tap into. I think part of it is the specificity and clearly defining what those expectations are. And that's honestly, it's one of the reasons why I think we have been so successful in what we've done in more turnkey or full system solutions is that as a team, we're really good about making sure that we're uncovering the details of a project so we can ensure a good outcome. The ambiguity that exists oftentimes in, hey, I just need 2 people to be on site to give instruction to. It's like, whoa, like what preparation is there for that? And what are the details? What are we going to be running into? And then oftentimes it goes, and we've had this as a problem before. It's not a bash fest or anything like that. It's some of the challenges that we run into. You get 2 people that go to site and they go, well, I don't understand why this person doesn't have soldering experience. And then you go, what did you?
I was just about to use that exact example.
Were they asked to solder? Because guess what? Soldering is somewhat of an old practice. Soldering isn't it's not as common as what it used to be because now you have a lot more finished cables or you have quick connectors that you can put onto cables now where soldering is perhaps not the standard. So because I can't believe this person didn't solder. It's like, well, did we set an expectation that they were supposed to? It's those kind of level of details that you need, even in those instances where you can't just say, hey, I need 2 people for 2 weeks. It's like, what will they be doing? What will they be in charge of doing? That's the most important piece of information that we can get.
Yep.
So just kind of it's interesting how much that has shifted over time because there was a period of time, we'll call it 6-7 years ago, where outsourcing labor in general was insanely taboo in our industry. I mean, I watched so many, I remember having these conversations with some integrators at Infocom, and I do appreciate this about people making sure that their reputation remains intact. We're like, no, my technicians and only my technicians. And then you start to get into how will you if you want to grow and expand, what's the solution to do that? And then realize that the scalability of continuing hiring and develop and training technicians across the country becomes much more challenging. And then that's really kind of that adoption of third-party resource. That's really when it kind of came into play. And that was just as recent as 5 years ago before that actually became something people and most integration firms were like, okay, yes, let's go down this path. Before that, it was like, absolutely not.
And what's even crazier to think is that there are integrators now who outsource almost all their jobs. They don't even have in-house installers. They outsource all the labor. So it's funny that that's transitioned that quickly in some places.
And I think the way the market turned during COVID is largely responsible for that too. All these, as Cory said, usually the technicians are the first to go. nobody wants to lay off like that. And I think they found that they could still operate thanks to those who are offering outsourced services. During COVID, you couldn't go on site anywhere anyway, so that was a little bit different. But I think they saw that there was another option, and it was working well.
Yep.
So a lot of them didn't rehire the full staff that they had prior to COVID.
And I do think it's interesting too, is like over that period of time, obviously adoption in terms of third-party assistance is only going to become more apparent in our industry. Obviously less taboo. Like I think one of the things that's interesting about what we do and the advancement of what we do is like, hey, we can start creating specialty around certain things too. Like we've talked about being able to do a lot of the things with DV LED. Like what can we advance even beyond just saying like, hey, we're doing full system installation capability, but now we can get really specific and granular about types of systems that we'll have specialization in that just give and enhance what our integrators are able to do even beyond what their core strengths are. So there's a lot that we will do that we've continued to do. And of course, 5 years from now, this will be a completely different conversation, obviously, because we'll have probably 40 things addition to this layered in. So it's been interesting to watch it all unfold over the last 4 years.
It's been more or less really amazing too. I know Cory and I always joke that once things kind of settle, we take a breath and then something new starts up, which really is a product of our own doing. I think we're gluttons for punishment in that regard, but that's what has made the team grow the way that it has.
Yeah,
so,
of course.
That and the amazing people on it.
Well, Morgan, I know that the entire services department depends on you to be available to solve every problem for us. So I know your time is very valuable. So unless you have any final thoughts you wish to share with us, we can let you get back to fixing and keeping everything moving. And we thank you for your time.
Well, thank you guys. Thanks for having me on. It was nice chatting with you and being pals.
Best pals.
Thanks, Morgan. Best in the biz.
All right.
Bye,
Bye, guys.
See ya.
Yeah, so that was fun having Morgan on. Glad she was finally able to join us. That was great. A lot of good insights. I think it was a good conversation, a good topic of which is this is something that is at the forefront of what we're doing currently. And hopefully people understand the reasons why we've made some of these adjustments and shifts. But we're not the most brilliant people in the world. So it does give people the opportunity. It's if you comment, have questions. Of course, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can leave a comment. And I believe on most of the platforms, you can leave comments as well. If you have any questions, don't reach out to John and I directly. Reach out to our marketing team. What's their email? Reach out to the marketing people. They'll get it to us. But we are interested in the feedback and want an understanding from the collective integration community, those who are watching, even if you aren't in integration, but familiar with AV technology, what your thoughts and feelings are, and some of the things that we talked about as well. Yeah,
and as the YouTube videos that my kid watches tell me, make sure you smash the like button. Make sure you just smash it to pieces till your fingers are bleeding. Just smash it. All that kind of stuff. Like it and subscribe.
Yeah, love it.
Would be a good podcast. Hey, Cory, do you have anything to plug? Do you have any plugs we should be dropping at the end of the podcast?
I don't have any plugs. Oh, I do have one plug. If you are listening to this, and hopefully it comes out before then, which I don't know if it will, but if it does, we already had our E4 in DC. Our next one coming up is arguably the biggest show that we will have of the year, which will be in Chicago. So that's pretty local to John and I. So both of us plan on being there next month. So you can come see us. One, I would invite people, whoever is watching the podcast or listening to the podcast, to actually come see us in person. But also make sure you come to the show because the shows are amazing. They're absolutely amazing. Chicago is by far the best one, in my opinion. It is always the biggest. We have all the CTSRU trainings that we deliver throughout the show. And then, of course, all the different manufacturers that support it. So it's always fun. All right, that does it. That'll conclude episode 2. John, always a lovely time. And we'll catch you next month with episode 3. See you, everyone.
Great. Thanks.